Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Diving In, where we explore powerful decks that aren't necessarily meta decks in many situations. These are decks that I typically find very underrepresented on the ladder, despite being quite decent. For this week, we'll be doing the John Calveit deck. This is a probably tier 3 deck, so ultimately it's not hyper competitive, although it's still able to reach ranks as high as something like top 1,000. It's really not a weak deck by any stretch of the imagination. We'll be doing this exact variant, which is of my own design. We've got Rot Tossers to stagger the Emperors and control enemy units. Rot Tosser is one of the best Nilfgaard bronzes in the entire game. It's very, very good, and I find it personally very difficult to run Nilfgaard without them, specifically seeing as how good it is against monsters in Scoia'tael, which is currently very representative in the ladder. Combat Engineers might run 2, but we'll be running 3 this time. It's very powerful. It gives you kind of a win condition of the late game. This deck's round plan is typically to put forward a huge amount of tempo in round 1 by playing Calveit after holding back and playing a bunch of spies, using Operator on Cantarella hopefully, and eventually taking round 1 really reliably with the tool that is Calveit, which makes Combat Engineers more reliably consistent since you're so able to take round 1 in most matches you play. Pair Brigades naturally to scale off of the strength. We've got Operator to clone the Cantarella, very powerful combo as you'll be stealing your Cantarella back and they won't have yours. Cyprian Willy to kill off a Necker or a Roach, and to provide a tertiary Alzur's Double Cross target, which we don't usually need, but sometimes it's nice. Operator, of course, being pulled after Cantarella by Alzur's Double Cross. Hopefully we find Cantarella in hand and either Operator or Alzur's Double Cross to clone it. And if nothing else, we can always Alzur's Double Cross out the Cantarella, and she'll come back boosted, which is nice, because she is getting stolen by us anyway. This particular variant of this list uses these gold slots. Now, none of these golds are particularly core. We've got Vilgefortz here, which is by far the most core slot in this list, but only if you're also running Roach, which is also a very good slot. Vilgefortz is an extremely high power Nilfgaard gold, very hard to play without him. Zoltan Animal Tamer has some synergy here because you can summon a disloyal bird and then steal it back, get a few extra points off of buffing the Impair Brigades, and honestly this card's generally underrated. In many situations, it's a pretty easy 15-point play, and that's very good. Yennefer the Conjurer to improve our Scoia'tael matchup. Not too much more to say there. And Xarthisius, you don't necessarily need, but I'm trying him out. Alternative options to those include Letho, if you're seeing a lot of Henselt, as it can counter those. Igni is always a decent choice. Regis and Ciri are both decent choices in this list. And that'll probably be about it. So, we'll get into some games, see how this deck plays. So let's dive in. Okay. So the first game we'll be facing here is against the Foltest player. As you can see, I'm pretty high on the ladder right now, 4,500. It's pretty hard to get beyond this point with this deck, but it can still reach points around here. So, we're very happy to see the Operator off the bat. It means that we can clone the Cantarella if we find it, and worst case scenario, we can clone a Joachim or an Ambassador. Cloning Ambassador could actually end up being better in many circumstances, but more on that in a little bit. Like to keep Rot Tossers if possible. Excuse me. We'll kick a first light first. There's not really a rush to blacklist any of these cards. Kick an Impair Brigade because you don't really need to see 2 of them off the bat. And then we'll just kick a Combat Engineer. It's a good blacklist and we don't necessarily want it. We've got 2 choices to clone with the Operator. We're a little sad we didn't have Cantarella here, but that's okay. We've got 2 choices to clone, which are the Joachim de Wet and the Ambassadors. The Joachim de Wet seems kind of like the obvious choice because it's a high level silver spy, or high power, and you kind of, it generates more asymmetry in that way, because you generate a 5 that you're pulling back to your side, whereas the Ambassador is only 2. On the other hand, however, if you end up cloning the Ambassador, their Ambassador, when they play it, might buff units that end up belonging to you because you have a bunch of spies on their side. That's part of the point of spies. Spies can really gain value out of kind of randomly targeted effects like Lubberkin and Ambassador as well. Like, for example, if you were to play Bloody Baron, I would just play spies and his Lubberkin would buff them half the time. This is fine. So, this is proper sequencing. Open with Rot Tosser kind of aggressively. We'll play an Emperor Brigade here. It'll get buffed up just by that one Tosser. And he'll have to deal with this Calcarcus in some way. I'm sure he will. Probably use a K20's siege support, or maybe another reinforced trebuchet. So, here we see a Cyprian Willy, and Rot Tosser there achieves very, very good value. As you can see, it provided a 6 body, it killed a valuable 7, while forcing out its effect on something that didn't end up mattering that much, and it buffed this by 2. So this card was just worth 15 points. That's really good. Let's do it again. The biggest thing about Rot Tosser's synergy with Emperor Brigades in this deck is that they can stagger their strength in a really significant way. This deck doesn't use the normal shell of emissaries being killed by Nausicaa Brigades, etc. That's very interesting. Since I don't have that shell, it can be kind of hard to stagger my Emperor Brigade since my spies just generally last until I Calveit. But the Calcarcusses do that very nicely since they only last for 2 turns, so I could play another Emperor Brigade here, and I mean in this case it's not staggered just because of the Trebuchets and the Cyprian Willy, but it would normally be. So he's losing 11 points. He's actually only effectively losing 10 because the trebuchet is going to go off once. So I need to put basically any amount of points on the board here to take this. We'll just be taking it with our Willy. So if he were to pass, we would immediately pass. He'd go 1 card up, which is the Siri, but he's down the roach already. Another target down, and you can see this Rot Tosser generated 14 value, just killing off more targets. Although in this case, it didn't kill a silver, which means his field medic is actually enabled, which is good for him. Since I don't have a lot of spies, I will be operating the Joachim de Wet. Yep, we'll just open with that now. There's nothing wrong with that. If we had more emissaries and stuff, which, I mean, right now, our hand is mostly awkward seeing as we didn't end up drawing any emissaries, but if we had more, we might have really considered operating an ambassador to force him to not be able to play it without risking buffing stuff he didn't want. So there's the Naneki. Presumably he'll res the Cyprian Willy here. Right, so my Emperor Brigade is actually at 0 base strength, which is a little funny. We want to try to stay ahead of him at every opportunity. Joachim de Wet should enable that. The problem is it could pull something like Roach, which wouldn't. Basically, we're scared that if we play something and don't stay ahead of him, then he'll pass, force us to go 1 card down, and since he has Siri, that's effectively 2 cards down. We'd probably play Ambassador here to stay ahead of him. Ambassador is obviously a 12-point play since it'll buff this up by 1, and we'll just see what it hits. Joachim de Wet is a little more risky. And obviously, this will go off once, but we're still ahead, as you can see. So, it's a nice clean way to stay 1 point ahead. Joachim is way too risky, and I don't want to have to use Zoltan Animal Tamer yet. Generally, you want to wait until you can hit 4 targets with it, whether it be on your own side or the opponent. He played a 12-pointer there, which is actually really high tempo. I'll be playing Vilgefortz here. I need to break his tempo. Yeah, I need to break his tempo. It's too important. And this pulls Roach out of my deck, which is great, because this allows me to use Joachim de Wet in the future. A bit of a risky move. Could pull something weird, but ultimately, this deck is very proactive. The worst thing I could have pulled is maybe Yennefer the Conjurer, and that still would have been fine. It would have ultimately resummoned Roach, which I have no real problem with whatsoever. Right. So, this Emperor Brigade is just getting buffed more over all these Rot Tossers. And he might find himself in a situation where he wants to get out of the round pretty soon. I expect he has a field medic to res this trebuchet with. But that doesn't ultimately do too much good. I mean, he obviously has no very good way of dealing with these cow carcasses. That's kind of the thing about cow carcasses. Even if decks don't tend to have very good ways of dealing with them, ultimately, there's some things you can do. Like, you can Ekimara it. Consumed decks generally run one Ekimara, and you can Karen it, of course, but then you're using Karen super early. You know, you can promote it. Basically, it forces your opponent into a very awkward situation where even if they deal with it, by either blocking it or removing it awkwardly, they don't really have a really clean way to do that in the vast majority of situations. So, I'd like to use Joachim de Wet here. Pull out an Impera dude. And it's probably best to get out early because getting him out before the Cow Carcass goes means he gets an extra 2 points. So, he might be looking to get out of this round here. If he stays in this round, it could even be a tell that he might have something like Igni that he's prepared to use, although if that were the case, he might as well just use it here as well.
But we're broke as shit.
If he doesn't keep up with me, he knows I'm passing. It's looking like he's not keeping up with me.
Humans.
I would pass off of this. So, he might have to commit something to beat me here. This is okay. Ultimately, we're not getting insane value out of our Calveit, and we are giving up round 1, but he's committed the Siri, and he's down a lot of his tools, which is really important. We've got 3 combat engineers coming through, which, you know, if he instant passes round 2, we can still get rid of them with the Nilfgaard faction passive. He's deciding, this is actually an important decision because it affects his draws. He's hitting Reaver Scout with a Fultus so that he can pull out one of these cards, increasing his draw rate of silvers and golds, which is important because presumably his hand isn't great. He would look to draw like Yennefer, Shani, etc. He might have those in his hand, but he increases that a little bit by doing it that way. Normally I wouldn't have liked to pass in a situation like that. Normally, that's the situation where I would really love to have some very, very stalling plays, because when you're ahead of them like that, you kind of either want to get out of that round or put value into the next round in whatever way you can. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. These are your combat engineers, these are your Cantarellas or other spies, even something like Vriad Dragoons, just putting value into later rounds. I couldn't do that in that situation, which actually kind of sucked. Or even Zarthisius, in a weird way, puts value into future rounds. Kick the Ambassador here. Found a Common Engineer. Might not get great use out of it. So the question is, what do I take this with? Because taking it with Zarthisius is committal to a gold, but we can lock him out of a draw. I think we should take it with a Combat Engineer, specifically because off the Nilfgaard passive, if we draw another Combat Engineer, we're going to want to get rid of it. Combat Engineer is a little risky in this situation just due to how the game played out. So, we're looking to mulligan aggressively here. We want Alzur's Double Cross or Cantarella. In fact, we kind of need them. So, there, we have one. So, this actually is interesting. This might mean I can play a little safer. I will probably kick the First Light. I don't want to draw a Combat Engineer, but there's a chance the First Light is already pulling a Combat Engineer, and in that event, kicking it yields me the option of drawing a Yennefer or an Alzur's Double Cross, which is better anyway. So we ended up kicking that, and that's good. In terms of proactive plays here, don't really see anything incredible. I can always Theseus, gives me a little bit of information. It's the card's ultimately a little underwhelming. I'm not a huge fan of Zarthisius personally. There's really not much to do here. Like, it only matters if he's playing Stennis, basically. Or Priscilla. That's the biggest deal. So the question is, I mean, if I kick one of these two, he sees the field medic. How Priscilla works, by the way, is specifically the face-down card they see is the top one off the deck. So he will see right now a Lacerate and a blank card. Right? This is actually important information to know if you're trying to look to utilize Arthesius to its fullest potential. So, the question is, does he pick the Lacerate or the blank card? He would pick the blank card. Right now, if I kick this, he would see that and that. I'll honestly just kick the field medic. I'm happy with him seeing a Lacerate and a blank card. He'll pick the blank card and it'll be Treb. The point is, Arthesius is kind of underwhelming. Now, he does have a very high floor in terms of value. In terms of, you know, he's always 11 strength, worst case scenario, and best case scenario, he can be really, really quite valuable. Not terribly sure if this card is super good in this deck. It's very good in certain situations. But at the very least, it's a very solid choice. So this is effectively going to pull combat engineers, which is a little obnoxious, actually. But it's still okay. Worst case scenario, it's still a 4-point dude. That's really not terrible. I mean, it's obviously a 12, but the A is off the Joachim, not the combat engineer. 4-point dude's okay. It doesn't whiff for as low as it could. Like, when you compare it to something like a Vico Varo or something, it's a lot worse. So, there's his Lebrican, and now we're kind of in a frenzy to get our spies out as much as possible. So, we'll play Cantarella here.
No one can hide from
We want to just spam spies, because every time his Lebrican buffs one of them, it buffs the Cantarella. So, this Alzur's Double Cross is representing an 8-strength combat, 7-strength combat engineer. We'd like to get rid of it for the potential to get other spies. If we find another combat engineer and we're sad here, that's fine. Not great at all, but fine. You'll note that the Yennefer has a slight anti-synergy with this deck due to the, you know, the spying nature. It's very good against Squirtle, which is an important matchup for it to face, and it's kind of okay for cards to have a little bit of anti-synergy. Really not a big deal. Like, for example, Rot Tosser could have an anti-synergy with Calveit, but ultimately, they're still both very good cards independently, and they can make you play a little awkwardly, but for the cost of that, you're getting the value of both of the cards. And I think Yennefer the Conjurer kind of exemplifies that in the same way. But yeah, we'll keep putting more spies on his side, and he'll keep having, hopefully, an awkward time with the Lebrican. It's a little unfortunate there. So, put one more spy on his side. And this will be the Agitator Bird. Interestingly enough, it doesn't matter too much where we put this, because we could put it here and it would accomplish the same thing ultimately, I think, because the Joachim is going to get pulled to our side anyway, so the damage to both of these units kind of balances out, and here, his Lebrican is buffing our units, which is really quite powerful. So he's kind of in a rush to put as many loyal units on his board as possible, and I'm kind of in a rush to put the disloyal ones down. So, the Yennefer here is going to be supremely low value, but it shouldn't matter. I'm getting a little lucky there at this point. Like, honestly, that's... he might be a little salty about that one. That's a pretty powerful decoy. So, now he'll see... I don't actually know what he'll see. It won't be Field Medic or probably not Lacerate either.
Who do I spy?
That'll pull Reaver Scout into that last Field
You
Medic.
one of us or not?
It's a powerful chain, but while Calveit is going off for a pretty good amount of... Jesus Christ.
Bloody non-humans.
So how many points is my Calveit giving me here? It's giving me a total of 7 here. And then it's swinging for 18 down the 6 for a total of 30 over here. It's 30 points. So it's 37, putting me at 77. It's just a bit short. It's unfortunate.
Not bad. Bad at all. Onward, sons
Yeah, this
of
yen is only
Nilfgaard!
zapping for 1 here too. Something math. I think I did that math wrong somehow. No, I guess it all worked out in the end. Anyway, very close game. I kind of got bailed out by RNG there, but at the same time, some of the inherent slight inconsistency of the deck really showed in that game. It was a little awkward at times pulling out combat engineers and Yennefer the Conjurer in situations where I did not want them in.
Checkmate.
So, here we find ourselves in our next game. It's Northern Realms again. For the past week and a half, we've been seeing a really decline in Henselt decks, and therefore a bit more of a rise in Foltest and Radovid as well. It looks to me like all three of the Northern Realms leaders are pretty evenly balanced right now. Although ultimately Foltest and Radovid don't end up playing too differently, they use effectively more or less the same deck with different ideas. Although this time we have the Operator Cancerella combo. A major part of the awkwardness of last game is our opening hand, where we didn't draw the Operator Cancerella combo, and we didn't draw the Incon. Now the Incon wasn't necessary, but ultimately it kind of screwed over our hand late. And that won't happen this time, which is really neat. So we're looking to get rid of the Roach, but we want to get an efficient blacklist going first. Which means probably getting rid of Ambassador. Even though it's only a blacklist of 1 that's fine. We'll get rid of Combat Engineer here, actually, because it's another good blacklist, and then we'll just get rid of Roach last. Perfect. Got 2 Rot Tossers, got Yennefer Conjure. We're basically good to go here. Open with Yenkon.
You best yield now.
The deck is a little bit reliable on opening draws. Now, I was able to supplement my draw luck last game with RNG off of the Lubberkin, much to my opponent's whatever word goes there. So we could try to operate the same exact way with a Raw Tosser on this. It's a little unnecessary in this case, though. I wonder about this one. I'm actually kind of inclined to just Operator my Cancerella out early.
You blind, greedy fool.
Pretty powerful play. Hugely, hugely asymmetric play. I mean, the entire point of Operator is somewhat apparent that you want to create an asymmetrical play. We saw last week with Queen's Guards. I was using Operator to give my opponent a Queen's Guard, and my Queen's Guard was effectively a Priestess of Freya that generated an extra Queen's Guard for future rounds. In this case, it's an asymmetrical play simply because of my leader. I'm playing Cancerellas that I'm stealing back, and he's playing Cancerellas that are just normal Cancerellas. Very powerful play. You'll note that in many of these decks, people might also run Decoy. And Decoy, I think, is really inconsistent with this deck, personally. I don't too much like it for the bronzes that this deck employs, and in many situations the Silver Spies don't end up coming down regardless. For example, Northern Realms decks don't typically run Stennis, so Decoy is at that point almost just a Scoia'tael tech. It's important to really realize when you're deck building which cards are techs for what, because that's really what Decoy would be in this deck. It would be a Scoia'tael tech, because it whiffs against monsters, they have no Silver Spy. It whiffs against Northern Realms, they don't play their Silver Spy. And it's pretty good against Scoia'tael, but it's just important to realize like what that card is effectively doing and how much you care about that. So he was able to block my Rot Tosser here with his Priscilla. He won't really be able to do that next time, which is pretty neat. I'll effectively just play this Impera Brigade here. Like I said, you want to play 1 before this Rot Tosser goes off. That's part of the reason we do this. It doesn't matter here because he's got Trebuchets that are going to mess with their HP values anyway, but it's very important in other matchups. You've got 2 Impera Brigades, and you do not want them to be on the same amount of strength because the opponent will Scorch them and will Igni them and will Bork them in ways you can't really handle. Although you can disrupt something like a Bork with Zoltan. But this Calcark is going to disappear next turn. I'll play this other Impera Brigade. It'll be 1 strength lower, although it should be 2 strength lower in a normal matchup. And it'll be very effective for that reason.
Let us see.
So, play Cancerella here. Pulling Alzur's Double Cross is pretty nice. Pulls Cyprian Willy. We'll take it. Why not? Now, we wouldn't terribly mind banishing that King of Beggars, but at the same time, holding out for Roach is a little bit better. I'm not a huge fan of banishing either King of Beggars or Priscilla against Northern Realms as a generalization, simply because they'll always be able to res the other one, and you're not ending up denying that much, whereas Roach gives you consistent value. That being said, there's some calls in certain situations to snipe off the King of Beggars, and here you'll see a bit of the anti-synergy with Yenkon. I'll play kind of aggressively. He's tanking his own units for a bit. The Yenkon in this deck is a very, very deliberate Squirtle tech. It's a recent addition that I'm trying out. It's performing very good against Squirtle like it always does, and generally you aren't normally forced to play your Cantarellas that early. Normally you can kind of play them late to the point where they aren't really screwing with your Yenkon, although it looks very weird here, specifically because he was able to play so slow. And forcing me into a situation where I kind of needed to play a spy to slow it down on my own end, which disrupts my combo. But it's okay. We're still getting enough value out of Calveit that Yenkon lowering her value at this point doesn't end up mattering too much. There's no reason we shouldn't ultimately be fine here. Okay. And yeah, see, that Cow Carcass forced out this Vernon Roche. That's actually massive, because he's in a round that he can't necessarily commit to winning, right? Which is a really big deal. So, we'd like to do a big spy chain here, and we want to get ahead of him. Impera Brigade is an 8-point play, and I'm losing 5 off this, so it's a 5-point play effectively. That's enough to stay ahead of him. We'll take it here. This isn't vulnerable to Igni because it's not in range yet, and even if it was, we can count on the trebuchets to not keep those aligned. It's important to realize that in certain situations, points truly don't actually matter. Like, for example, this Cantarella. It looks worse than it is that this Yenkon is hitting this Cantarella. Don't get me wrong, it's not great, but ultimately, ask yourself what it really affects, because I'm able to stay ahead of him every turn using the same methodologies, and once I play my Cantarella and he passes, I'll always be able to win with a Calveit. In this specific scenario, the negative points this is being worth right now really aren't going to affect anything at all. So, we'll get a nice emissary chain here. We're looking to just put huge value on the board. Wow, that was not even remotely a nice emissary chain. Anyway, that'll be good enough. And these Cow Carcasses buff these Imperas, which is always good value. A little bit of extra value on stuff like that is great. And, as always, I'm staying ahead of him. 1 point up, and the Yenkon is actually helping with that. Despite the fact that this Cantarella may ultimately return to me, she's helping me stay ahead of him, which is important.
Peace is priceless.
He had his own spy after all. Passing here is honestly looking pretty good. I expect that he has no way to deal with this trebuchets dying. I expect that the Yennefer is going to keep going after more value, and if I play the Cantarella here, he'll pass having forced out both of my Cantarellas and leaving me with a pretty awkward John Calveit. So, we'll see what happens here. He's losing 13 value, so this says 47, but unless he does something about it, oh.
Nasty wounds, those, but you'll live.
There it is. So, depending on what he pulls, he should be able to beat me on even cards here. Yep, there it is.
Salutations.
Definitely an awkward situation on that one. That's fine, though. Still got our other Cantarella. We've got ADC pulling out a Cyprian Willy. He doesn't actually run Roach, unless it's in his hand, which it wouldn't be. He's not. He would have played it earlier if he had it in his hand or something. So, no Roach for the Cyprian Willy to banish. Okay. So at this point, our Alzur's Double Cross is actually going to be pulling our last Impera Brigade. So, he might do an instant pass here. This hand is actually pretty good. I have no problems at all with this hand. I guess I could kick this. I might end up drawing a gold card. In worst case scenario, I find a combat engineer that he instant passes to. I
Tell
beat
me
him
the
with it in
gist.
the same way.
What do you
He's
want?
giving me an opportunity to get ahead of him. He got a pretty bad res there off too. So the important thing is the Radovid. I'm pulling Combat Engineer with this Elzer's Double Cross, but I kind of have to do it after he passes if I actually want to get value out of it.
What
Because
do you
otherwise he
want of
will
me?
just Radovid it and take off the Adrenaline Rush. Looks like we're going moderately deep for this one. That's okay. This will pull a Combat Engineer, and he only has one Radovid, so it's totally fine if he does it here. If he Radovids this, I'll just use this Alcer's Double Cross, pulling another Combat Engineer at 7 value, and carrying this over into round 3. Combat Engineers are a large part of your win condition with this deck. They ultimately just put a lot of points into round 3, and you can win a lot of round 3 situations one card down from a good carryover in from round 2. Looks like he wants to go for it. He's thinking about it. So, let's assume he Radovids this. It obviously blocks both the Adrenaline Rush and its effect and puts me down to 17 points. Now his Trebuchet is going to put me down to 16 as well off of a single play. Which means that this will put me up to 23, and he'll have a nice opportunity to pass and force me to go one card down. And that card will actually possibly be Calveit. Maybe. It's a little weird of a situation, actually.
Barbarians.
Yep, so I'm at 23 now. So what we might see is his pass, my Calveit to take the round, and then I might just mulligan away Cantarella. Is there any point to doing that? I could always just play Cantarella before I Calveit. This probably makes a lot more sense than mulliganing it away. It's kind of a more effective way of accomplishing the same end, I guess. Alternatively, I could try to beat him with something like Cyprian, who isn't really going to see more than 10 value here. But the Cantarella Calveit package isn't really that big. Although, actually, I mean, I'm drawing into Emissaries and Ambassadors. Maybe it's totally fine. Maybe the correct play is Cyprian here. So, I will end up doing that, I think. I will Cyprian here. Kind of inclined to hit this Trebuchet. Lowering its base strength is kind of nice, because he might pull it randomly with the medic. If I'd hit the siege support, it would have banished it instead of lowering its base strength, which doesn't really make his medic pulls worse, right? This makes his medic pulls worse. And he's only got one more field medic, but why not? So, we're down one card, but we have a potentially powerful combo. We've got some cards that we want. Cantarella will draw some emissary chains. Hopefully we'll find Zarthysius here. That'll be a big deal for us. That's okay. Powerful Calveit combo coming in here. This needs to find an emissary or a Zarthysius. No, sorry, not Zarthysius, Vilgefortz. This is actually bad. I actually need to cycle this for either emissary or Vilgefortz. At this point, emissary is... Is it possible that this is correct? I mean, I don't need it to summon Roach because I've already got the Zoltan Animal Tamer for that. Is my win condition finding Zarthysius? Kicking this... I mean, it's a 12-point play, straight up. Emissaries aren't much better. Ambassador is, and emissaries find Ambassador. I do actually want to kick this, unless I find the Combat Engineer. It's the correct play. We'll see what this pulls. Hopefully an emissary. Decoy. Decently good play, because I was going to get it anyway, but it gave me 9 points, because it was going to return it as a 6 instead of a 15. So he sacrifices 9 points for a card, and when you look at it that way, it's really not that powerful on his part. So playing a combat engineer here would be very unfortunate. Playing an emissary would be very good. Playing an ambassador would be totally fine. So the question is, does he have a large controlling card like Bork or Igni? And ultimately, the results in this game is basically going to depend on that. If he has either Bork or Igni, I will lose. If he doesn't, I have a pretty good chance at winning. Because these are giving me a truly insane amount of points.
Burak.
Yep. And yes, my Calveit isn't worth as much. It looks kind of bad, but ultimately you have to realize that he used decoy on Cancerella specifically because of the Calveit. His decoy was quite terrible. Decoying a spy is really, really bad because it's like playing a double spy, right? You're taking those points off of your board and putting them on the opponent's board. It's effectively like playing a 25-point spy, or more specifically, I guess, a 27-point spy, because you're removing a 12 and putting a 15 instead of just putting a 12 like you normally would. That's a really big deal. So the Calveit forces him to play in a really awkward way, so it's hard to evaluate it just based on the Calveit itself. So we'll put a companion here. We also could have put a agitator up here. Would have been the same amount of points. And our Calveit's going to swing this for a total of 9 on both sides, making 18. There's the Bork, and with it, the game. Definitely a bit of an awkward game on that one. Him having the hard removal Bork option was a big deal. Yep, that's fun. Let's go into the next game.
Respect
Okay.
nothing to me.
So, last game here. Finding yourself against Eithne. Strange choice for a Squirtle leader. Usually you either see Bruver or Francesca. Eithne is generally the worst one. As you can see, I made a just these 2 edits to these 2 gold slots. I switched out Yennefer and Zerthisius. Or, yeah, Yennefer the Conjurer and Zerthisius. I think Zerthisius particularly isn't bad. I'm not a huge fan. Whereas Yennefer is very good in the Squirtle matchup and pretty mediocre outside of it. It's a bit narrow of a tech. But I'm trying this again. I've got Operator and Cancerella, which is the core of my combat. I also use Double Cross, pulling out my Cyprian Willy, which is pretty good. This is a situation where having the 3rd silver target to pull is really actually quite nice. Got a First Light that we don't necessarily need in this matchup, but we can't blacklist it for very much value, so let's open by kicking the Ambassador here, because it's the best blacklist. And we can continue by kicking the First Light, and then we can just go ahead and kick this Imperial Brigade. Perfect. No Vilgeforce here, which is a little bit sad. Eithne could be a tell of dwarfs or something. Looks like it isn't. Though interestingly enough, we will be able to get a pretty good Igni on that melee row, I should expect.
You blind, greedy fool.
So let's go ahead and do one of these. We are probably not going to want to raw toss her that melee row.
Let's enjoy the weather. while
That's
we still
fine.
can.
That's Scorches down. That's really good for me. That's a really, really valuable tool for him in this matchup that he no longer has. I am very, very fine with that. But as I mentioned, I almost don't want to raw toss her the melee row, specifically because I want it to get to the point where I can Igni 2 Vanguards, and there need to be some mercs there for that to happen. And besides, I can always raw toss her a little bit later. Get some more value out of there.
We shall drive the 8 men into the sea.
Very high tempo plays. Should be able to beat that nonetheless. Nothing for me to willy here. Which is a shame because it's a pretty powerful card. I'll just emissary out something. Might end up pulling an ambassador or something. Ambassador is the high tempo option here. And playing these brigades staggers them into an Aglaeus worse than this. This is a pretty good Aglaeus on his part, don't get me wrong, but ultimately it's one unit compared to two, and that's always going to be a bigger deal. Right. Doesn't end up affecting me too much. So, at this point, I can start playing Cantarillas, because I'm threatening to beat him in a single card should he pass. Take the Vilgefortz as always. Vilgefortz is an incredible card. He's maybe the best card in this deck. I would run an entire deck of Vilgefortzes if I could. Card's nutty. So normally you have to be a little careful about playing two Cantarellas, because them scorching their own Cantarellas is actually a pretty legit play.
I shall be your eyes, my lord.
But in this case, we really so much don't have to worry about it. This is risky to Roach by kicking this, but that's fine. We really so much don't have to worry about him scorching it, specifically because we've got this to block it, and his scorch is already downed anyway.
Death
So,
awaits us
this is
all.
the idea of this deck, basically. And this wasn't something I was able to showcase before in the other games. It's a little bit draw dependent, and it's a little bit matchup dependent, but ultimately, when you can force a situation where you're just playing for pure reach, you're staying behind them very passively in a way that they really just can't beat, you end up with really absurd value. Like, truly, truly absurd value. So, we just play for reach more. Right. We're always just going to keep putting points into next round. I mean, we can always win this round. That's kind of the thing here. Like, he can Aglaeus me for a lot of points, but that doesn't really matter. It's fine. It's obviously going to come back. Roach is obviously a good way to pop Fireball
Everything
Trap.
all right?
His Manticore Venom hits for low value. It's very strange. I would have expected it to hit here. It might be a tell that he doesn't have Aglaeus, which is huge for me. If it's true. So at this point, this is pulling out either a Rot Tosser or an Impair Brigade. I'd love to get another Impair Brigade out here. Yeah, sure, why not? So, I'll just put this in back. Just kill off a few neophytes. Nothing wrong with that. And even in this situation, like, yeah, you'll know it's not amazing. So, discount the 3 from Alzur's Double Cross, because I'm evaluating this as Rot Tusser, not a Rot Tusser pulled by Alzur's Double Cross. But if you look at this Rot Tusser, it's 6. It damages, it kills these 2 3s, and it buffs this by 2. That's a 14-point card, even in this really kind of meager situation. Nothing really spectacular, but it has a hard time achieving actually bad value. So, we'll just play some emissaries here.
A shame I
Get some
have no
chains
time.
going. Combat engineer here. The question is, what do I end up buffing? Am I scared of the Aglaeus Scorch? And the answer is, yeah, honestly. I'm not really in a position where I feel like I need to take the risk, honestly. He zaps it. That's fine. Nothing really wrong with that. So, let's Calveit here. The reason... So, if he were to pass, we want to Calveit as soon as possible. But the reason we might not want to Calveit yet is because we're giving his Saskia a lot of points. Like, right now, we're stealing 5 units, which means that we're increasing his Saskia's value by literally 10 points if we Calveit before he Saskias. Because the Saskia would buff mine, and now it's going to damage mine. That being said, I don't care about 10 points. I've got points to spare. He's kind of out of the round. Like, he just kind of has no say in this round. Like, yeah, he'll Saskia here. He's been... Oh, wow, really? Okay. Expected the Saskia there. That's fine. And ultimately, as you can see, we're still in a really dominant position here. End up willing the Vanguard. Forces him out of the round even more. I don't want to let him have this at all costs. We'll will the Vanguard here.
Slow, ain't you?
Obviously, I mean, willing the Roach would be nice, but willing the Vanguard allows my Igni to hit higher points. Now, this is very telling. He knows I'm going to Igni, so... I really didn't expect him to have another Vanguard. That's very strange, actually, that he wouldn't have played that earlier. That's fine, though. This is a 5-point play, so it stays ahead of him. The one thing you'll note about Rot Tosser is... sometimes you really wish you could play the Cow Carcass on your side in situations where, or not play it at all even, in situations where you kind of, you know, maybe they pass and, like situations like this, where I need to stay ahead of him, and maybe if I had one less point, the Cow Carcass could actually be working against me. So, he just has no way to win this. Like, I'm always going to be able to beat his presence in this round, no matter what. I'll Igni his melee row here. So, a pretty decent showcase of the deck going right. Now, ultimately, yeah, the deck is a little inconsistent. I don't think it's fatally inconsistent. Really not terribly so. But, yeah, it's a little inconsistent, and that's why it's not hyper-competitive. But when it works, which is, you know, mostly about the cards you draw, it's ridiculous. It's effectively an auto-win condition when it goes off. Because you just end up in a situation where you win. Look, I just won round one card up. That is something that really can't normally happen in the game. Like, you end up creating just bizarre value situations. It's so common that when you win round one, you win it on even cards, or even something like one card up. Looks like we're just 2-running him here. That's fine.
Your humble servant.
Sure, why not?
Barbarians.
So, might end up scorching this with Eglace. Doesn't matter to me too much. I've got Vilgefortz to come out for huge value.
Clearly
Got some
I'm
Raw
weak
Tossers.
little horned wenches.
That's cool. So, he'll Eithne this Cow Carcass, and I'll Vilgefortz it.
No mercy! Come to Pappy!
A little drawn out a bit here.
Augur me! Ackers!
I'll just pass off of it.
There will be no negotiation.
So, we'll just pass here. No reason to play at our hand. Ratasser is not going to go off here. And that's the deck. So, ultimately, this deck is pretty powerful. It's not a top tier competitive deck, but you can't really discount it as non-competitive either. It's tier 3 competitive, which means it's not going to be seen at super high ranks, but ultimately you can still maintain ranks in something like the top 1000 with it. It's really not so bad. I would highly recommend this deck, or something very similar to this deck, to anyone interested in playing Nilfgaard right now, because I think Nilfgaard is a bit of a weak faction, and ultimately I think this is maybe the strongest way to play it right now. Pretty good. Pretty good deck overall. And I'll see you guys next time.